Nicholas Alexiou, Department of Sociology, CUNY College, and Hellenic American. Honored and pleased to have a poetry reading by Dan GEORGAKAS. Dan, thank you for doing this for the Hellenic American Project. Looking forward to your poetry readings, and I'm sure you're going to tell us a few things also about the poems, because I know they were written in very difficult times, similar to ours probably in some extent, and we'd like to discuss that at some point later. We're ready for your reading, Dan.
Okay, well, I guess one way to start is to say that the first poems I ever published, one of the first poems I ever published was in a Greek magazine, Athene magazine from Chicago. And shortly thereafter, I began publishing in another magazine called The Minority of One, which is an anti-authoritarian socialist magazine edited by a survivor of Auschwitz. And so all my life, I'm sort of between those two poles. I'm ethnically rooted and I'm socially conscious. And I've chosen poems which kind of fit into that theme tonight. And the first group is, takes me back to Detroit, to the community I grew up with. Almost all the elders, well, all of them were foreign born. And so there's some poems about these foreign born. I'm going to start off with a prose poem. The immigrant takes a pebble from the shore to drop at sea. With this right, he acknowledges he might never more return. The umbilical cord severed with a brave hope for a new world resurrection mingles with sorrow for the abandoned certainties. He will ever be a Greek, but his voyage is not an odyssey. He leaves behind his island forever. My mother was in the 1950s, many of the men died. And for instance, my mother's society, I would say that most of the women were widows. And this poem is about the Greek widows of the 1950s and 60s. Consider these Greek widows of America, completing black-clad lives into rented rooms of the old neighborhood, or dreaming alone in the aging homes. Now the children sleep in the wedlock so eagerly sought for them, but which had no place for those rough-skinned peasant girls who once were matched to older men and now endure November graveside days sipping the last of the homemade wine. Detroit had a Greek town, a real Greek town, and it had lots of cafeterias, just like the old country. And they were right on the street, and there was a huge window, like a department store window. And inside was Greek and outside was America. So I used to sometimes visit I somehow used to visit Greece that way. Near midnight, when uncles and grandfathers have abandoned the marble-top tables, old country hands play the final games of pinochle, and old world eyes scan Greek tabloids. Coarse fingers smooth unruly mustaches as strong coffee revives Santuri melodies of their lost villages, where now some child would be coming to gather them. In this American night, many of the old ones find their sleep in a rented room and their security in a post-worker's monthly pouch. The next one's personal. The first time I went to the library, my father insisted on going with me. As I looked for titles suitable for my school assignment, he found a copy of Homer to put in my hands. The following year, he treated me to a set of encyclopedias. For my birthday, because my handwriting was so poor, he bought me a deluxe Royal portable typewriter, the day's state-of-the-art technology. A month or so before he died, when I was just turning 15, I saw him struggling to read Aristotle in his adopted English. I'm sure he would have been very proud that I have worked with words all my life and ventured from time to time into poetry, but I fear I never truly knew him. And to conclude this little section, about ethnic trees. Sometimes a walking tree. Sometimes a walking tree tiptoes like a ballerina. Other times a walking tree marches like a marine. Sometimes it pirouettes to a high crevice or a sun-baked plain. Even when a walking tree finds fertile soil, tap roots strain, tender spines snap, limbs sag. But when sweet spring reappears, new birds singing unexpected songs arrive to hash their legs in the comfort of sturdy, reborn branches. Sometimes a walking tree is envious of those still rooted in the home orchard, and sometimes not. The next group, short group, has a different tone, and they deal with the psychological isolation that so many feel. We felt it in the 60s, and certainly with COVID, we have it. And so these are poems that deal with people in various psychological tensions, trying to deal with the technology and complexities of the new world. I don't think any of them are Greek. First one's called Pinball Purgatorio. I stand taut by the flipper buttons of a pinball machine as a metal comet carouses in an electronic universe. My ego is lured by the illusion of perpetual play. Amid the clamor of bells, buzzers, and lights, hope rebounds foolishly from bumper guard to bumper guard. Flippers hurl and re-hurl my hope into what seems perpetual play. But in the end, I know the glittering steel must finally elude the straining fingers of my schizoid soul. Well, New York is a wonderful town, but not all the time, and not necessarily every borough. So this is about the Bronx L, elevated train. Looking out the window of the Bronx L, his acrophobia strikes in the form of a huge public pool daring him to dive. He knows, just last week, the doors flew open on the wrong side, dropping a Puerto Rican kid leaning on the glass trying to look cool. But he doesn't care about PRs. He doesn't care about the strep hanger beside him reading a Dago paper. He doesn't care about the Jew with his wailing wall psychosis. He doesn't care about the freedom now scrawled on the ghetto wall. He's too busy trying to fight off a mad impulse to leap. He's too fucked up trying to save himself to worry about the world. The train passes empty Yankee Stadium, where old Lou Gehrig made his sad farewell back when sports were still fun. And now he grabs the pole real hard, like it was a baseball bat, because he doesn't want to scream. He only needs to hold out a few more seconds. The L is swaying downward toward the river. He can smell the narcotic fog smothering Hunts Point. And just before the safety of tunnel darkness, he hears the ghost of Thomas Wolfe chanting, "Only the dead know Brooklyn." With a bitterness beyond his years, he says, no one will ever know the Bronx. Modern day. This could be yesterday. Virtuality. Walking alone on the banks of the brook, a mobile phone pressed to her ear brings her tidings of another place. Trickling waters become background music. Glistening rocks disappear from consciousness. Not tuned to her terrier energetically sniffing fallen leaves. Not feeling the crackle of twigs beneath her step. Deaf to the yellow finches chattering in the trees. Her time and place, a now that is never present. Now, the last batch is deals with, well, Shelley said that the poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world, and these are various political poems which deal with ecology, and I try to get a glimpse of a world in which there are no authoritarians and in which wealth is shared commonly by all. And leaders are judged by the standard of living of those at the lowest level of their society. In other words, I won't say the leadership is no richer than the average person. I start with Pisces. I don't believe in astrology, but I'm Pisces the fish, torn between love of birth waters and passion for the open sea. The movement of stars and moons on the morning of my birth render me a double Pisces, even more divided than most of my kind. Over the distant seas, I see my mother's Smyrna, a place I know only as myth. Behind is my devastated Detroit, the motor city built on the straits connecting two of America's Great Lakes. I am strained between wanting to return home and needing to venture forth. Impossible to realize both, but I am not distressed. I savor the joys of exploring new harbors more than I rever my place of origin. Like I said before, I don't believe in astrology. Moving to Massachusetts, I fulfilled my, I returned to where in the 1960s, I spent a lot of time living on a farm in New Jersey. And now that I'm moved to Massachusetts, I'm again feeling the joy of the green world. The frogs in the pond burst into song as we arrived at twilight. The tree frogs trilled, the tadpoles beeped, bullfrogs let out mighty burps of joy, sang all night without a conductor, without a written note, the day we entered our new house. Similar vein, hummingbirds sipping the sugar water, a blue jay spreading its wings in the bird bath, butterflies circling their favorite purple-hued petals, bees at work at the yellow lips of a sunflower, a snake lazing on the rocks, a bullfrog having his say at the edge of the pond, a pair of turkeys chatting in the woods, tiger lilies everywhere. The city has never seemed less relevant. And the question is, what is to be done to change the problems we have to the world we can imagine? The acrobat from Xanadu disdained all nets, and when we saw him performing the central twirl of his triple forward roll through space, we knew his purity went beyond mere pride. Certain flight requires total risk. um, a poem that that's been translated many times and anthologized, even has been used as a title of a book, deals with the October Revolution in Russia. And it's not a homage to the Communist Party, but a homage to men and women seizing control of their own destiny. October Song. They who never ruled before poured from their factory districts across the bridges of Petrograd to make October. The moon was so startled, all global tides shifted. The lights went on all over Europe. Nothing can ever be the same. And let me conclude with a more humble poem about aging and maybe the nature of the human experience. No more forever. Chief Joseph and I are resting on the high hills of old age. I feel the time of our time passing. On the lower slopes, the dense air causes shortness of breath, even among those less frail than I. Our scouts tell us the melting mountain ices will soon drown the lowlands. Our shamans prophesize the earth cracking beneath our step. I wish it to be otherwise, but I am somehow comforted by the fleeting light of our cousin, the firefly. Oh. Quite a mixture, huh?
Yeah, we need a few moments to recover, Dan. I was beautiful and heavy poetry, many messages, and it is very interesting how contemporary they can sound at the same time. Although you said some of them they were written in the 70s.
Yeah.
But they have many common characteristics with our era. And from a first impression is what you mentioned, the commitment of a poet. You think that poets should be committed to certain causes?
Not exactly that way. Basically, I'm interested in ideas, and I write prose, I write fiction, I write poetry, and so I write about what engages me, and I don't have any abstraction of, I have some love poems too, which have nothing to do with politics and so forth, but I do believe I think everything is political, but some things are more political than others. For instance, somebody said, when you write about trees, you're not being political. And I would say, well, it depends what you say about trees. So no, a lot of and I didn't read the more militant, angry poems because I didn't think it was appropriate in this particular setting. So I don't think of myself as a political poet or committed poet, but I'm politically committed, and therefore when I write, it comes out. It comes out. I'm not much for theory.
Mm-hmm. When you first started writing poetry and some of the circumstances or conditions that you decided to write poetry?
Well, basically, I see something and it strikes in my mind and I think about it. And writing is a way of clarifying your thoughts. You think you got a brilliant idea and you start writing, hey, it's not so brilliant. Or you work it out. Some of my best ideas come just before I fall asleep. And then when I get up in the morning and write them, they're not so brilliant. I was just falling asleep. But sometimes a phrase will come to you and you begin to work with it. Like right now, I'm working on the phrase "farewell to Ithaca." Ulysses is supposed to be the great hero, and he is great in certain ways. And I love Cavafy's poem about him. But the truth is, after 20 years and he comes back to Ithaca, he's the same guy. He's the same autocratic guy. He thinks his wife, it's fine that his wife spent 20 years life, without him. He never thought about her during his adventures. He thinks his son should be like he was, following his footsteps. And he looks at his rivals and he kills everybody. Even those he's not sure about, but he's just to be sure. Well, the most horrible authoritarian. So I'm trying to think of some way of putting that into a poem or a story, and I'll call it Farewell to Ithaca. I guess I'm emotionally, I'm inclined to the Argonauts, Jason and the Argonauts, going forward to something new, which is not to say Homer's not a great poet, and the Iliad and the Odyssey have lots of wonderful things in them.
Mm-hmm. After all, as Cavafis indicates, what matters it is the journey. Right?
It is the journey, but in a way, I agree it and I don't agree with it. Mm-hmm. Where are we going? Well, okay, we come back because there's cycles, because you return home, you never leave the city, and that's all true. But farewell to Ithaca.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Since you mentioned Cavafy, and he's one of the Greek poets you read at some point. Are there any other Greek poets that you got some interest into their
he's the only one I'm passionate about. When I first discovered him, I was just enraptured. And he is my favorite poet. Not my favorite Greek poet. He's my favorite poet. But I like Ritsos. I like any number of names, you mentioned, I'll say, oh yeah, sure. But none of them kind of grabbed me with his style. I liked his style and all that kind of, maybe because he grew up with English language, he translates well. For instance, Elites, it's almost impossible to read in English because it's so Greek. And my Greek is good enough to appreciate how good it is. My Greek is good enough to know how complicated it is and figure out, gee, if I could really read this well, I might be very enraptured by him. And of course, I read Safaris and,
Yeah. Do you think that you identify with Cavafy to some extent because he also had this dilemma? He was a Greek in Alexandria and an Egyptian in Alexandria in Greece. You saw that growing up in Detroit, the relationship to the Greek American community there.
Yeah.
It is also a dilemma, the immigrant dilemma, the dichotomy between the old country and the new world. How was this feeling when you're growing up and writing poetry?
I didn't do too much poetry when I was a teenager. I did a little bit, but not too serious. But I always felt Greek. In some ways, I'm kind of a peculiar guy. I was very American. I was popular in school and this and that and the other thing. I was president of the class, but people called me Greco. So somehow I projected something about myself, or there was something about myself that was Greek, even though I was totally immersed in America. I think I had the least connection to things like the church and some of the traditional Greek things. I preferred going to with my father to the ethnic society meetings. I like that. Going to church, I found it kind of boring. But and I guess I shouldn't put it quite that way. First of all, the priest was from Greece, but there was something alienating about it. There was something like, you're small, they're big. You must ask forgiveness. You kiss their hands. It's not me, But when you're with the ethnic society, you're kind of holding each other and laughing and dancing together and listening to music. That's when I feel Greek. I also find, strangely enough, as time has gone by, I have very good rapport with many Greek-born Greeks. And most of my friends are actually Greek-born Greeks rather than Greek Americans. And I have no idea. That could just be circumstances, but it's just the way I am.
Yeah. Well, we know that through your research and your radical writings and thoughts, you're very well known also in Greece today, with all this time. And also, I know a Greek film director did a documentary. So I know that your thought and your words, they're in both sides of the Atlantic. But tell me how the Greek American community received your poetry, or they knew about your poetry. You had any readings within the Greek American community, or it was more with the American community?
Mainly it was with the American community, most of it. But during the anti-junta movement, we had readings, and there was the Greek community, and they were pretty responsive. And basically, when I had a chance to read poetry to a Greek audience, I think what you have to do is you have to choose one or two things that the audience can identify with. I don't mean placate. I mean, you've got your work and this is what you want to say, but you've said many different things. And so when you're talking to a Greek American audience, you want to choose one of the poems that they will respond to, and then maybe they'll say, well, what else is this guy writing about? And in some ways I'm a mole, because everybody knows I'm a leftist and so on and so forth. They say, but he said, okay, he's okay. Because I think the reason for that is I respect people who disagree with me. And I try to change their mind if I can, but I don't try to browbeat them. And I listen to what they say. And so I have a couple of very conservative friends that we hardly ever agreed on anything, but we have great discussions. And I think that's very Greek. I think it's very Greek.
Yeah, I remember in one of your readings 2 years ago, when you read a poem that I like, Red Star.
Oh, yeah.
That there was a lot of debate around it. But as you said, to exchange ideas, and you did your writings, your activism, and your poetry was very significant contribution during the junta years between 67 and 74. But also you wrote lyrics for songs.
No, I translated some Rizzo's poems that were in photo out that became in the linear notes inside of Romeo Cini and the one about the concentration camps.
Yeah, I see.
Mauthausen, is that?
Yeah, Mauthausen. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote. I did the translation.
Yes. that Mikis Theodorakis put the music on
And
that.
both of those, yeah. And we published them in, it was forbidden in Greece.
Yes.
And there weren't any records in here in the US. So we were able to get a company to put them out. And then we put liner notes inside to explain, you know, translation, because the people, that company sold to Americans, not just to Greeks. And therefore they wanted to have a booklet saying, what's this poem about? What's this album about?
Do you think that we have, you know, Greek American poets, major or minor, and in your experience, your research experience, and your deep knowledge of the Greek American community, is this a community that appreciates poetry or the arts in general?
I'll be rough. No. It likes to talk about it, and it likes to have a vase and talk about the ancients and so forth. But they don't have poetry readings. The community doesn't usually have poetry readings. It doesn't have a regular meeting in which a little poetry comes in. This isn't a poetry reading, but somebody reads a poem, somebody gives a speech, we don't have that. We don't have any book clubs. New York City doesn't have a bookstore. You know, so it's difficult. And most people who are Greek American background end up drifting away because there's no magazine. You know, several have been attempts, but they don't last more than 1 or 2 issues. Dino Siotis, a poet, he put out a couple magazines for a while. Yeah, it's a tough road, but all the roads are tough. It's tough to be a conductor in a train too. I don't complain. I'm not a complainer. I try to get things done. I'd rather go a couple steps rather than sit and say, why doesn't somebody step? And I think what you're doing here is very important. And there seems to be a little uptick. But there's nobody like Harry Mark Petrakis, who's dedicated his whole life practically to writing about Greeks. Let me say this too, for instance, here's another problem. And it's about a book I don't like, Middlesex. It has nothing to do with homosexuality because I don't care about that. It has to do with, he writes about the Greeks of Detroit. He writes about the 50s and 60s Greek, and he actually puts his book in the church that I grew up in. So I knew those people very well. And he gives them ideas and attitudes from his Greek America, which is the suburbs after the Detroit riots or insurrection, the Great Rebellion. And he doesn't understand how sophisticated those immigrants were. Those immigrants, I mean, I don't want to mythologize them, but they are much more sophisticated than people think they were. And they had some very progressive social ideas and grappled with change all the time. I mean, they compared. So I get worried sometimes when people are not worried, but concerned when somebody writes about Greeks and who are they talking about? Yeah. Plus, I think there's a difference between Chicago and New York. I think very few Greeks grew up in all Greek neighborhoods. Yet almost all the stories are about people growing up in Greek neighborhoods. One of the themes I've seen in a lot of poetry and so forth is, oh, the woman who never learned Greek. In my community in Detroit, if you didn't learn English, the woman who didn't learn English, if you didn't learn English, they considered you stupid. They said, what are you going to do? You're going to go to J.L. Hudson's and order your clothes in Greek? You know, you're less than 1% of the population, and you're not going to even talk to like. So I call that very sophisticated. I mean, it wasn't a big philosophical thing like we're in America, we have to concentrate and live like, speak this language and understand its ways. And most of the Greek Americans that I knew, immigrants, had close American friends. It isn't that they didn't have Greek friends, they had a lot of Greek friends, but they also had American friends who were real friends. I don't just mean somebody you chat with, but buddies. Even my grandfather, he had a strange relationship with one of my former teachers, who was a Protestant from Midwest Michigan, who was a Republican. And somehow my grandfather was kind of an anarchistic immigrant who illegally left 3 countries and all the rest of it. They kind of got along together pretty well.
So it seems to me that this working class, ethics, as you said, it was their will to be part of the American society, to be part of the American dream. But at the same time, they felt very secure about their cultural traits. They weren't afraid what we call today assimilation, because they had this feeling that they could keep their cultural characteristics. But now that the Greek American community has such a tremendous socioeconomic mobility, upward mobility, why we're afraid so much and feel guilty about the assimilation or being part of the American society? How I see an antithesis, an oxymoron between those 2 different eras in the Greek American community.
Well, I agree. One of the reasons, of course, is mixed marriages, out marriages. Mm-hmm. The Greeks have married, 80% of Greeks have been out marrying non-Greeks for a long time. So therefore, you grow up in a different family situation where, let's say, one of the parents is Italian and the other one's Greek. Well, the Italians have a great history. What if somebody Chinese? Whoa! Talk about the even Egyptian. I mean, there's so if you grow up in a mixed ethnic group, no one of those groups usually dominates, and therefore you begin to lose this ethnic identity. I think the Greek American community will get smaller as time goes by. And what I always say too, and I think this is kind of I stole this from Elia Kazan. He said, my blood is Greek, my citizenship is American, but I choose to be a Hellene, which means to accept Hellenic culture. And I think the challenge of the 21st century is, will people choose to be Hellenes? And they should choose to be Hellenes if it does any good for them. If it doesn't do them any good, they shouldn't be Hellenes. And that's one thing I think our community doesn't understand, our community, that you have to be attractive, not duty, not, you got a heritage to carry on and so forth. But this is an attractive, dynamic community with wonderful things to offer. And that's why you want to be. And someone say, yeah, I do. And that's why you do have many spouses who become Hellenized, because they choose to be Hellene.
Some thoughts about the poetry that was written, inspired by the Greek War of Independence of 1821, since pretty soon we're going to have this 200-year anniversary, the bicentennial of the Greek Revolution. And we saw that the American society was very supportive and very inspired, from Byron and all the things we just said. Yeah. what is to choose to be close to the Greek ideals or values or poetry or light. So any thoughts on the Phil-Hellenic attitudes and sentiment of America? And
Well,
if still exists, right, in American politics or in American society?
it does exist. The Greeks are very popular. It's an ethnicity with very few enemies now. People look up to Greeks and so forth. I mean, not envious, but they say, "Oh yeah, you know, a Greek moved into the neighborhood. They don't run away." On the other hand, much of the idea of being Greek American is summed up in My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is full of stereotypes, out of date things. It's a comedy, it's a satire. I understand that, but basically, there's a movie called Dark Odyssey, which came out in 1954, which has exact same theme as My Big Fat Greek Wedding. It's like the daughter wanting to marry American. And it's so much different and it's so much more authentic. First of all, the parents are against it completely, but they get to meet the guy and he's a nice fellow, and they have cognac, and you see their little house and so forth. And they're very proud to be Greek, but they're not idiots, you know, they're not. And so I said, gee, 54 to 2003, we went backwards in the media. And I love Melina McCurry, you know, she's terrific, but never on Sunday. People say, oh, you go to Greece, then you get drunk. You go there in the summertime, and you get drunk. So that's part of the American image now. Whereas in the 1800s, Thomas Jefferson, Madison, these people were already had Hellenic schooling. They some of them could write Greek and read Greek and correspond with the revolutionaries. And the Americans saw the Greeks as carrying on the American Revolution. Democracy, birthplace of democracy. Now, the new democracy is reviving the old democracies. We're pretty good about that. And also, there are things that we haven't, that were important. For instance, Steve Frangos discovered a phenomena about the Greek statue of Chios, of course, was slaughtered during the revolution, and people carried off, killed women, were made slaves and so forth. And a sculpture was made of a Greek maiden and again, going back to a new technology, when there was no TV and there was no radio, people actually went out to look at statues and discuss things. And this statue became one of the most viewed statues in the United States. And so the abolitionists and people who were for freedom embraced the Greek Revolution and saying, you see, they're fighting against that and we're fighting against it too. And the abolitionists in particular, who were against American slavery, used that statue as one of their ways of, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people seeing the statue, and they finally made 3 copies of it.
And raising money for the cause and sending money and other things. Yeah, it was for fundraising reasons.
The Americans sent a lot of money to Greece, not just Greeks, but Americans. They sent some fighters, a couple of people went to fight, including at least 2 African Americans fought in the Greek Revolution on the Greek side.
James Williams, one of them, who also
yes.
who died and is buried in Greece, in Argos.
Yeah.
a freed slave from Baltimore. Yes.
Yeah. And he had been a sailor there, and he joined the group. I think there were some African Americans on the other side too, perhaps, but these are the ones we know about. And if there were two, there are probably more. But I guess what I'm saying is the revolutionary fervor was what was so important. And by the way, Harry Mark Petrakis in his book, the second book on revolution, has a long section about Lord Byron. It's beautiful. It's some of the best writing he ever did, and he's ever done. And it's some of the best understanding of Byron, how complex he was, his weaknesses, his strengths, and so forth. It's terrific. I'd love to see more people read that this year.
Yeah. Even a very young Edgar Allan Poe, when he was 19, he got inspired by Byron.
Yes.
He wanted to go to Greece and fight, supporting the revolution. He made up a story probably that he traveled to England and he was captured in London. But all this Greek fever, as you said, it was captivated at the time. Do you think that is going to be a continuity to the Greek American community and Greek American poetry?
It's 50-50. And maybe not even 50-50, maybe 30-70 or 40-60 against. I mean, it's hard. Most ethnic groups in America dissolve by 3/4 generation. So we're getting to that stage. But it's a new world. It's we've got the internet, so therefore the connections with Greece are better now. I'm living here in Massachusetts I talk to Greeks all the time, but they don't live here. And so I couldn't have done that 20 or not even 20 years ago. So there are the new technology could be very much in our favor. And I do think we have a great culture. I'm enjoying it. I always enjoy it. And so you carry on, but you are who you are. I don't have a banner that says become a Hellene. I say become yourself, and I'd be happy if that happens to be Hellenic.
Very good point.
Well,
very good point.
I guess the other thing I wanted to say, we're kind of wandering over different things and so forth. And this comes out in poetry, why I hate Ezra Pound and other people. I'm against authoritarianism. I don't care if it's church. I don't care if it's a political party. I don't care if it's a husband abusing his wife or wife abusing her husband. I'm against authoritarianism. I think that is a political issue that is paramount. And I think it's paramount that we also save this planet while it's still savable. And I think there are a lot of Greek traditions that help us, but there's some that don't. Let's get rid of those. And that's the beauty, I think, of mixed ethnicity. When, ideally, if you're a Greek American, you say, oh, look at these Greek things, wonderful, I'm going to keep those. And here are these American things, some of them are good, I'm going to add them and leave the garbage aside. That doesn't always happen, but that's a way to go. But the reason I say I don't like people like Ezra Pound and some of those writers is they really write in a way that it's hard to follow them. And they make their personal life an important part of the story. That if you don't know their personal life, like James Joyce in his last book, if you don't know his life, you can't possibly follow that book. Well, why the hell should I study somebody else's life in order to read a book about his life? you know, or you somebody like Martin Amis or other writers that they constantly cite literature, images, and so forth from the past, which most people, even educated people, don't know. So that gives them elite status. That makes them authoritarians. I like to say I like to write two-penny poems with like a subtle dialectic contain infinity. In other words, if you can pull that off, simple words, and yet with their own beauty and their own rhythm and so forth, I don't think most people succeed. Even the great poets. One of the things people say, who's your favorite poet, which is fine. But I say, actually, I have favorite poems. Like I've read a lot of Bertolt Brecht, hundreds of pages, and I think it's only 2 or 3 pages that I really love. That's good. That's an achievement. Of all the poetry written in the world, he wrote 2 or 3 poems that carry. Wow. I like William Blake. I like sometimes Robert Frost is deeper than he seems to be.
Mayakovsky?
Who?
Vladimir Mayakovsky.
Mayakovsky. Well, he's another one who wrote so much. Oh, God, he wrote way too much. But sometimes his spirit just carries you, and you like it. And you like the spirit of it. And he knew it. He wrote a lot of things for the party newspaper, like little poems, 4 or 5 line poems, every day in the newspaper. And he said, well, most of them weren't very good, or they were forgettable. But still, he was engaged.
The most recent Nobel Prize in Literature was awarded to an American poet and a female. Right?
Joy Harjo?
No, Louisa Klug. She just received it. Louisa Klug. She just received one. Teaching. She used to be teacher at Yale University, raised here in Long Island. Do you think that American poetry is a poetry according to what you said, or it is more conventional? How do you criticize? How you
I find most of it conventional and boring. It's like okay. I think the last ones who broke a little bit were the Beats, and not all of them, but some of the stuff they did was different and edging toward who that was exploring, and they weren't tied to universities. And Lawrence Ferlinghetti is my personal hero. And so is Dudley Randall. Those are 2 people. Well, Ferlinghetti people know, Randall people don't know, probably. Dudley Randall was a librarian in Detroit, Black librarian. And all the guys all the Blacks in Detroit, poets, there were a lot, always complained, all the Black poets, we're not being published, the big publishers won't publish us, only pitch, they have 100 poems, they have 1 Black or 2 Blacks, and they were going on and on and on. And so he said, well, damn it, let's publish our own. And he started this little thing, a little broadside press. The the books are cheap, small. Sometimes you can put them in your pocket. And he said, I'm going to print best poems I can find. And he did. And guess what? It was very successful. Became the biggest publisher of Black poetry in the United States. And he had some issues, ran 10, 20, 30,000 copies of poetry books. Now, Lawrence Ferlinghetti in San Francisco had the same idea. And so he made uh, these little books, like really big, you really could put them in your pocket. And I believe they cost $1, maybe $1.50 at the most, you know.
And he was very supportive of the anti-Huda movement.
Oh yeah.
He made a lot of readings against the junta, and he wrote this letter. And yes, he was and engaged, as you said. Coming back to that, though.
Yeah. Let me just finish one. He
Uh-huh.
published Howl, which was considered obscene by the big publishers, and I believe his edition of Howl, he must have sold 250,000 copies.
Wow.
Can you imagine 250,000 copies of a poetry book? Because you quit complaining.
Yeah.
You know, you try and get in, you want big publishers and so forth, but there are other ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And so you keep finding new ways and struggling, and that is also reflected in the poetry itself, because you can't be thinking that way and writing differently.
Perhaps we're coming something similar now with the new social movements, and I will start by mentioning one of your many books, My Detroit, Growing Up. We're going to discuss later, which is the 15-year old anniversary since his first publication. I think you made another publication recently.
Another edition.
I keep reading recently in newspapers, and I'm trying to read the new poetry that young Black Americans write. And I see their articles here and there arguing that because of the movement of the Black Lives Matter, they believe that the new poetry that they write is going to change things. And I'm saying that because you have a chapter in your book, Black Metropolis, about Detroit, and probably it is part of what you discuss, that how the engagement, how the social issues incorporated in poetry can amplify the voices for justice, for as you said in one of your poems, the society we're dreaming of.
Yeah. And I think what it is in those, in like you say, some like Black Lives Matter poet, they're not writing about the movement, they're writing from the movement, which means they're in the world. They're talking to real people. They see real problems. And to the degree that that's reflected in their poetry, that gives you profound poetry instead of diddling, oh, I didn't get tenure this year, you know, that kind of poem, which there are a lot of. Or I shouldn't say this because I love universities, but I'm not sure that modern writing programs in universities are such a great idea. I remember Upton Sinclair, famous novelist, some universities after teach a course, he says, okay, he says, I'll teach a course, but it's got to be on my terms. No argument. He said, no matter what, but I will teach the course. And I said, okay. Got the course, 100 students in there, got up. He said, well, you want to be a writer? He said, what the hell are you doing in a university? Get your ass out there and find out what the world's all about and come back and tell me about it. End of course. Well, it's an extreme, it's by a true story. But that's the way I feel. Like people say, oh, I looked at the blank page all day and I couldn't come up with anything. I said, well, then who in the hell asked you to put, forget about it. Put page away. Go out and do something. Live. Then come tell me about it. I don't look for things to write about. Either they come out of me or they don't come out of me. I don't go searching. I know a lot of people have notebooks and stuff. It's okay. Different folks, different strokes. That's okay. Don't do that. I just try to remember it. You know, sometimes I scroll down a line or something. So I can't tell you how many envelopes and scattered pieces of paper you put a line down and so forth. And you come back later and you say, "Ooh, what was I thinking?" Or once in a while, it's good. Once in a while, it's good.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you very much. And we'll discuss soon the My Detroit thing and the relationship.
Okay.
The race relationship. So thank you very much for the poetry reading and your thoughts at the same time. Very significant also for the Greek American community, but also for all of us who like poetry and beyond poetry, as you said, between the relationship between society, between ourselves, between the world, you know, the environment. You brought up environmental issue, which is an extremely important issue, especially in our days.
Yeah.
GEORGAKAS, thank you very much for the poetry reading.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
So we just finished this recording.
Bye bye. Thank you.
And, we have to make sure that we meet again in an hour or so, around 1:30, to have a second.
1:30. Yeah, I think it's 1:30.